At one point in the 1950s, the United States flew a nuclear reactor inside a bomber. Not to power it, not as a weapon, just to see if the crew would survive. And somehow, that insane idea led directly to a rocket engine that was supposed to take humans to Mars. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. Alright, so this whole thing started about a couple weeks ago. I was watching a live NASA broadcast, talking about going back to the moon, building a base, and eventually heading to Mars. And buried in all that was something to stop me cold. A nuclear-powered spacecraft. And I thought, hold on, haven't we tried this before? So I started digging, and what I found starts, not in space, but with one of the strangest airplanes ever built. The NB-36H Crusader, and the original story alone sounds made up. In 1952, a tornado ripped through a Texas airbase and damaged the nose of a B-36 bomber. Most people would scrap it. Convair looked at it and said, "What if we turn it into a flying nuclear laboratory?" And the Air Force said, "Sure." So they took a 35,000-pound nuclear reactor and stuffed it into the bomb bay. And here's the part that makes no sense at all. It didn't power the airplane. It was just along for the ride. The entire purpose was to see if radiation would kill the crew or destroy the aircraft systems. That's it. So, to keep the crew alive, they basically turned the cockpit into a bunker, an 11-ton shielded capsule made of lead and rubber. The windows? 10 to 12 inches thick. They couldn't even hear the engines. Pilots said it felt less like flying and more like driving a submarine. And then there's this. Because the reactor was air-cooled, it vented radioactive gases straight into the slipstream. So the Air Force created a tracking program to measure the radiation trail. The official name? Project Halitosis, because the airplane had radioactive, bad breath. And it gets worse. The plane never flew alone. It was followed by a chase aircraft measuring radiation, and a transport plane filled with paratroopers. Their job? If the NB-36H crashed, they would jump directly into the radioactive wreckage. They jokingly called themselves the Glow-in-the-Dark Squad. Between 1955 and 1957, they flew 47 missions. And what they proved was, yes, you could shield a crew from a nuclear reactor, but there was one problem. The shielding weight was so much, the airplane was basically useless. As one reporter put it, you could build a perfectly safe atomic airplane that would never get off the ground. So, by the early 1960s, the idea of nuclear-powered flight in the atmosphere was dead, but the research didn't go to waste, because engineers realized something important. In space, you don't need to shield in every direction. Radiation travels in straight lines, which meant you could use a shadow shield, protect the crew, without carrying 11 tons of lead, and just like that, the focus shifted, from airplanes to rockets. That's where Project Nerva comes in. This was the 1960s answer to deep space travel, and it was bold. They weren't thinking about robots. They were planning missions to Mars, with people. Nerva was a nuclear thermal rocket. Instead of burning fuel, it used a reactor to heat liquid hydrogen and blast it out the back. Simple idea, incredible performance, exactly what you'd want for a trip to Mars. But just like the NB-36H, things got messy. In 1962, the core vibration crisis. The reactor shook so violently, it started breaking itself apart. And yes, it began ejecting radioactive material out the exhaust. Again. And just like before, they didn't stop. They tested harder. Even eventually destroying a reactor to simulate a worst-case crash, because that's how you solved problems back then. And just like the NB-36H, they made it work. By the mid-1960s, Nerva was stable, proven, ready, on to Mars. And then, history repeated itself again. 1973, budget cuts, changing priorities, canceled, again. Not because it failed, but because the world moved on. And that brings us back to today, that NASA broadcast. They're working on something called Space Reactor 1 Freedom, but this time, they're doing it differently. No brute force, no atomic hot rods. This is nuclear electric propulsion. Quiet, efficient, patient, the kind of system that doesn't race to Mars. It just keeps going. And that's what really stuck with me. We didn't just try this once. We tried it in the air. We tried it in rockets. We got closer than most people realize. And twice, we walked away. Now, over 50 years later, we're trying again. But this time, it's not about proving we can do it. It's about finally finishing the job. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.